Welcome back to the channel. Now we're going to watch The Horrific Future of 1984 Explained. This is Eckhart's Ladder. This should be interesting.
If you are a man, Winston, you are the last man. Your kind is extinct. We are the inheritors. In George Orwell's 1984, humanity has taken a drastic and almost total slide into totalitarianism. Man is now governed by three ideologically identical superstates. In the novel 1984, we follow the life of Winston Smith. Today, however, we'll discuss the world building and lore of the dystopian alternate history. However, we can't ignore Winston totally. He's the conduit in which information is passed to us, the reader. It's through his eyes that we experience 1984's London, and
Two things. One, 1984, what if you switched it around and it was really 1948? That's really when they instituted all of this stuff. And now, since it's a well-oiled machine, everything looks like how it's looking now.
Ain't got no cash, ain't got no car, but 24 booster shots in your arm. Oh, nothing. Be happy.
But then also, what if this was a documentary as to what they wanted for the world to become? It kind of seems like the world has became that. So, good job, evil fucks. You did great.
I say this importantly because one of the novel's key themes is death of the past and control of reality. The party uses censorship and propaganda to an almost unimaginable degree. We can't be sure whether everything Winston learns is true or only a fraction of it. Perhaps ironically, the history we can be most certain of is still made fuzzy by time. It's the history told by those old enough to remember the pre-revolutionary era. Human history in Orwell's universe matched, or was at least very similar to ours until the early to mid 20th century. It seems like Earth still saw two major world wars pretty similar to the ones we experienced in our reality. However, post-World War II, the globe sees a worldwide slide into authoritarianism. There were civil wars, revolutions, traditional fighting between powers, and at some point there was the emergence of three distinct superpowers. These were Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia. Oceania was broadly formed through the joining of the British Empire and the Americas, Eurasia through Soviet conquest of Europe, and East Asia, the remaining territory. At some point, there was a nuclear war between these powers, as evidenced by atomic impact zones in London. Winston gives some memory of his childhood. Let me read. Winston could not definitely remember a time when his country had not been at war, but it was evident that there had been a fairly long interval of peace during his childhood, because one of his early memories was of an air raid which appeared to take everyone by surprise. Perhaps it was the time when the atomic bomb had fallen on Colchester. The timeline is a bit unclear here, but it was probably the destabilizing effects of the nuclear war which would allow what would later be known as the Party to facilitate an anti-capitalist revolution in
It looks like an innocent handshake, but it's probably some kind of Masonic handshake.
Oceania. The party was ostensibly founded on the principles of Ingsoc, or English socialism, but would transform into a brutal and oppressive authoritarian force. By the mid-60s, the founding revolutionary members of English socialism were purged, as were many civilians, and party leaders were ultimately replaced by what would become known as Big Brother. As this happened, much of the population seemed to have also been wiped out by famines and selective culling. Since that point, the three superstates have been in a constant, unending war, which I'll describe later on in this video. Current society has saw all technological innovation and scientific progress completely stop, except for in the areas of surveillance and warfare. People are living a life arguably more similar to those of the pre-Renaissance era, with constant food rations and oppressive poverty among the proletariat especially. Examples given include the fact that common items like razors are often completely unobtainable, many lack even shoes, and that the government flaunts a merely 10% childbirth mortality rate. And as we'll see, if that's what the government says, it's probably significantly worse. Now, when I talk of Oceania's history, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. Certain aspects, like Winston's memories, we know are probably pretty accurate. Other bits of information we get only from the government itself, which is completely unreliable, or from a treatise known as The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, often simply referred to as the book. This purports to outline the truth of history and the party's rule, and it very well may do so, but it was also produced by the party, which again I'll explain in a second, as a
So you can't believe that anything the party makes, you can't believe it. Later for taking it with a grain of salt. Don't take it at all. It's absolutely false. kind of like our current government.
Tool to counter revolution. We have to assume it's true, otherwise there's nothing really to talk about, but it's important to keep that all in mind. Anyway, I've been talking about the party. The party is the totalitarian government which rules Oceania. At the head of the party is the supposed individual known as Big Brother, the man whose face is plastered across the streets of London. In reality, Big Brother is more of an undying idea, a human face of the party rather than a real person, but he may also exist as a leader in some form. The party seeks the total destruction of the individual in favor of absolute adherence to the party. It does so through several means: mass censorship, destruction of the past, propaganda, the use of war and scarcity, ideas known as doublethink and thought police, a new language called Newspeak, and in general, the destruction of the idea that there's an objective reality outside that of the party. Before
We have Newspeak now. The way the younger generation talks is Newspeak. I think it may have started with the 50s and 60s. Their slang, their jive, their hip, whatever they were saying. And it evolved into almost unrecognizable speech today. And then doublethink or double talk, all that stuff exists today in 2025.
Before we get into those ideas, I want to talk a bit more about how society in Oceania is structured. The vast majority of people, probably more than 85% of the population, live in a lower class known as the proles. The remaining 15% of the population are party members, with a very small portion of that being those within the inner party. The proles are seen by party members as subhuman. They live in extreme poverty and are crushed by the drudgery of their existence. There are no economic classes within the proles. There's no middle class. They exist uniformly and again in an extreme state of poverty.
Rich and poor, which Dark Angel outlined in that show. Also created by James Cameron, Terminator 2 fame, that there was rich and a poor class. And that show came out in 2000, ran for 2 successful seasons, and then they just took it off the air. That was also the first show where we saw drones in the air, UFOs flying around monitoring people, but we was like, this is futuristic, a UFO. Do we have those orbs now? Let me just go on and not even say that. Let's just finish.
The outer party performs most of the actual functions of government and is fully subject to the indoctrination and surveillance of Big Brother, while the inner party is comprised of the elites of the government. They, however, have still drank the Kool-Aid, perhaps more so than anyone, but we'll come back to that. The main goal of Big Brother and the party as a whole is to maintain power and the status quo, which it largely accomplishes through the control of reality. I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's a good thing to focus on. The party seeks to destroy any objective truth outside of that which the party puts forward. In the world of Big Brother, there's no axiomatic 2 + 2 = 4. No, reality is fully broke down through language, news, propaganda, and more. Here's a great quote from Winston, who is not like most within the party. He's harboring revolutionary ideas, which I think sums up the state of things well. And if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same lie, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past, ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. Whatever was true now was true from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite simple. All that was needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control, they called it. In Newspeak, doublethink. The party...
Dude, I hope there's something on the other side of this simulation. That's just me. Because this is just the end of it? What the guru said, you can't tell me life was meant to be like this. A black man in a world dominated by whiteness. I hope it's something on the other side. I don't want to be dominated by nobody. Just let us all just relax like the Native Americans did. They had no borders. Women was running around topless everywhere. Man, they was eating off the land. Air was fresh. Water was clean. Then the corporations came.
The party engages in endless propaganda. Every piece of news is not only written by the party, but retroactively edited so that the party's statements from the past always match what they've currently determined to be the reality. Winston works for the Ministry of Truth, where he doctors photographs, edits newspaper articles, does anything necessary to remove discrepancies in reality. This includes by removing people eliminated by the party who are not
The Mandela effect?
said to have died, but to have become unpersons, to have never even existed. On a small scale, this includes changing the stated production quotas to meet later.
Let's bring that back, because it sounded like he said people didn't even die. They never even existed. They were an unperson. Who even came up with this term unalived? Let me relax before I get unpersoned.
Unpersons, to have never even existed. On a small scale, it's newspaper articles, does anything necessary to remove discrepancies in reality. This includes by removing people eliminated by the party who are not said to have died, but to have become unpersons, to have never even existed. On a small scale, this includes changing the stated production quotas to meet later estimates. On a large scale, the party changes the faction they're said to be at war with in the middle of a victory speech. Every document they had previously created is forced to be changed, and this general mutability of the past is key to the party's aims of thought control. All pre-revolutionary pieces of media were also destroyed, and it's very possible that even the actual year the novel is set in is completely incorrect, and that's also true for the reality and nature of the party's formation, the state of the world, everything. We just can't know because of the total control on all information. The effects of the party's destruction on the past is clear and are becoming even more effective over time, as those few with pre-revolutionary memories are dying or becoming older. The next generation is being born completely in the party. They think it immutable like the sky. But what's more, the party is also changing how people think.
Right. And this is what's being done with LeBron James. He is pushing, I'm the greatest basketball player ever. But the powers that be, the party, are pushing lack of accountability from young men. It's not your fault. But you ever notice how these people who are pushing these ideals live a totally different reality? He's not accountable to his team, but he's married. The people in society, the young men who are not accountable and they don't feel like it's their fault, they run out on their kids. They don't raise their kids. But this dude got all of his kids around him.
They enforce strictly on party members the notion of doublethink. This is the idea that someone must be capable of believing and accepting two completely contradictory pieces of information so that they can accept whatever is presented to them by the party. This is the crux of their authoritarian thought control. This is the removal of objective truth. Here's a quote: "To know and not know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which canceled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic. Someone who has truly been indoctrinated to doublethink will do all of this unconsciously, and the novel shows the effects of this as the counter-revolutionary Winston is so broke down by the party's torture that by the end of the novel, he accepts the lies he's presented and even grows to love Big Brother." If you're looking for practical examples, one could be that immigrants are both lazy and are stealing all the jobs. The citizen is forced to hold both beliefs while choosing which one to lean on at a given time to accept the party's reality. Another example would be that the party is actively removing the idea of love, but still venerates their own, what they've chose to call, ministry of love.
So you can't love another human being, but you can love who they tell you to love. In this case, they want you to love the LBJTQ, PS2.
Freedom is undesirable, but that they're protecting the citizens from losing freedom to other nations. The most simple understanding, and the one given by the book most often, is that one has to believe that 2 + 2 can equal 4, it can equal 3, it can equal 6. Whatever is needed, again, to accept the reality presented by the party. Another quote: "That's
called gaslighting. To me, it seems like it's gaslighting.
The ultimate subtlety, consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. Obviously, a full transformation of a citizen into a perfect party member is very difficult and only possible through the extreme methods employed by the party." And just to be clear, I mentioned this earlier, but doublethink isn't only applied or expected of outer party members, but it extends and is perhaps even even more important to those within the inner party, the true people running the government. A given example is the war, which we'll discuss later. Inner party members will know that a piece of news or even the war itself is largely false, but inner party members are also meant to be the most hysterically in support of the war with the most absolute hate for the enemy. The party also seeks to control language, hence the creation of Newspeak. Newspeak is an evolution of the English language designed to help facilitate the party's—
Hold on. Duck speak, to speak without thinking. Good sex, the normal intercourse between man and wife for the sole purpose of begetting children and without physical pleasure on the part of the woman. Okay, that part of the patriarchy has to go because it's not fun if the girl isn't having fun. Sex crime. Any other sex outside of good sex. What? Own life. The tendency to enjoy being solitary or individualistic, which is considered subversive. I tell you, man, this is weird. Definitely a documentary.
Aims of thought control. One way it does this is by removing a significant portion of the total words used in English. If the party wants to remove an idea, it removes the associated word. For example, science, freedom, they don't exist in Newspeak. The language is also seriously simplified as well. For a pair of words like good or bad, one is chosen and the other is defined by its relational opposite to the other word. So instead of having good and bad, you'd have good and ungood. You can modify something to be more extreme by adding a plus or a double plus. So instead of horrific, you'd say ungood plus plus. And that's true.
That sounds like what's the movie? Sly Stone, Demolition Man. You have to modify your calm. Psh, goodness gracious, man.
For how words are modified into adverbs, adjectives, and more. In 1984, Newspeak is still mostly reserved for government documents, newspaper, and party members, but eventually the rollout across the masses could significantly impact an individual's ability to think abstractly about anti-party ideas. There's a fist though, and the way the party's power and vision is secured is through mass surveillance and force. In 1984, it's not only anti-party actions which are illegal, but also anti-party thoughts, which are known as thought crimes and are monitored by the thought police. Party members live with devices in their homes which not only endlessly dispense propaganda, but also record audio and video feeds. Party members can be eliminated for having the wrong facial reactions, for having the wrong movement, starting the wrong relationships. Party members are expected to know how to act, and those who don't are brought to the Ministry of Love and brutally re-educated through torture. Many of these re-educated are still removed, but some, like Winston, who undergoes a complete breakdown of his physical and psychological self, are reinserted into society as some of the party's most fervent supporters. The party also facilitates its goals through the manipulation of society. It breaks down the structure of family and even sex. Children are recruited into the party at a young age and often turn against their parents. Sex is treated as something one does in service of the party, not for pleasure. And on a broader level, the whole makeup of society serves this purpose of further propagating the party. Many see the greatest threat to the party as the proles, the so-called unwashed masses, which, as I said, make up 85% of the population, but which hold no institutional or practical power. Still, due to sheer numbers, a prole revolution could overthrow the party. So, although they're not subject to the same degree of rigorous screening or monitoring as party members, they're still carefully managed. Why are they not?
Dude, the only thing that could save someone from this kind of reality is God. And I would hope that there's one God, because if there were several gods, we might not never get saved. They'd be arguing with one another, fighting one another, until they killed one another. And then the devil could just take over. Dude, I hope there's something on the other side of this simulation.
Outright eliminated? Well, the proles do much of the manual labor and provide the sustenance needed to keep the civilization running. I think more importantly though is the fact that upsetting the order to the degree of a total extinction of the proletariat class could actually affect a revolution. Instead, the party keeps the proles in a total state of destitution. They arguably do have more individual freedoms than at least outer party members, as they can visit who they want, go to bars, engage in sex, even do do some risky activities, but they're still subject to propaganda and are mostly kept in line through the pure harshness of their condition. Another key to managing the proles was the removal of a middle class. The middle class was seen as one of the keys of past revolutions and could operate as leaders for the lower class, thus facilitating the upheaval of the system and the removal of the party from power. Instead, the middle class is incorporated into the outer party and undergoes arguably the most stringent propaganda and surveillance. Still, outer party members live certainly in an era of squalor. They have not much food, everything is dirty, their living conditions aren't great. It's really only the inner party members with their flats and their servants who have any true luxury. Those born to party members can potentially move from outer party to inner party and vice versa, but the lines between proletariats and party members are not to be crossed. War is also of fundamental importance. Oceania has been locked in perpetual war for decades with rival superstates Eurasia and East Asia. In reality, these three states fight only over a specific piece of territory using only small, highly trained infantry. There are no invasions of closely held territory, and in honesty, there's no real desire for conquest. Even if there was a desire, due to the sheer land and resources of the three superstates, one can never hope to be conquered, even by the other two working together. What's more, we're told that all three states are also nearly identical in belief and practice, and the real purpose of the war,
which means they're probably working together, sounds very much like a one world organization.
I think they all realize is to keep people afraid, to dispense propaganda, to create an enemy to hate and fear, and perhaps most importantly, to burn resources. The main goal of the party's transformation of society into this extreme totalitarian state was to keep the inner party in power. Past tyrannical governments had always been toppled. It was thought that only through extreme measures could things be kept stable. This is why the war was so important. Here's a quote from the book. It was also clear that an all-around increase in wealth threatened the destruction, indeed in some sense was the destruction of a hierarchical society. In other words, the war exists as a mean to burn resources, to build guns, to build massive floating fortresses that serve no real use. They're essentially burning production in order to stop that production from going to improving the lives of those within the working class. As I said, no state has any real ambitions of conquering another or taking territory. It realistically doesn't matter who's fighting who or whether there's any fighting actually happening. In the novel, we see London, which is in a region now known as Airstrip 1, frequently bombed, but this is most likely simply government false flags. They're bombing the population to keep them scared. It's very possible, given the source of this information, that no war exists whatsoever, and it's very possible that Oceania isn't the true size that it's portrayed to be, that there are no other superpowers, perhaps that the UK is simply a totalitarian state. We really can't be sure. Society, however, is also hyper-violent. The massacre of civilians, public hangings, battles, they're all regularly shown to everyone, including children. The government also has what's known as the 2-minute hates. During these, the government will show anti-East Asian or Eurasian propaganda, driving citizens into a furor, giving them an outlet for their anger, probably which they hold towards Big Brother unconsciously, while also using mind control tricks to give them positive associations with the party and, of course, most importantly, with Big Brother. But what's the point? If even the inner party is brainwashed, why is society this way? As I mentioned, it started out with a desire to protect against the revolutions of old, and from there, it probably to a degree spiraled out of control and has taken on a life of its own.
The revolutions of old, again with the LeBron James stuff and that whole talking point of you old heads, the old versus the young, which it really shouldn't be that. It should be the old teaching the young, because they did this same stuff to us. Now let us kind of show you guys with this new technology they made for you or for all of us to keep us doped up and confused. You know what I mean? To help you get out of this situation, and maybe we can rescue everybody. But unfortunately, we're not going to be saved from this, whatever you want to call this thing, the way that we want to be. We're going to be saved the way the Almighty has prophesized it. And that's just what we got to deal with.
It is true, however, that the elite still do live more luxurious lives, but we're told in the book through the character of O'Brien that ultimately it's the allure of total power. And I'm going to end off the video with this famous quote from O'Brien. He speaks to the future Big Brother, one in maybe 50 years, maybe 100 years, where they've achieved all their goals. When we are omnipotent, we shall have no more need of science. There will be no distinction between beauty and ugliness, no curiosity, no enjoyment of the process of life. All competing pleasures will be destroyed. But always, do not forget this, Winston, always there will be the intoxication of power, constantly increasing and constantly growing subtler. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. What happens to the world and to the party? Well, we don't know. If the state of the world is as...
Let me unpack that. If that doesn't sound like the devil being jealous of man, I don't know what does.
stated, there's very little hope. But Winston believes, as I would, that the totalitarian government as ran by the party is unnatural and that it will eventually, through some means, be toppled. He believes in an uprising of the proles, that the type of tyranny cannot exist forever, that there's sort of a historical memory of living in better times. The appendix of the novel describes Newspeak and Oceania and the party as something in the past, as written from an in-universe point of view, but what actually happens in the story isn't so important when compared to the lessons we learn about power, about totalitarianism, and I think primarily the importance of objective truth. But that's all for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video.
Yo, that video was really deep. Y'all let me know if you like deep stuff like this. In any regard, I'll see you next time.